Click next, and let's look at an example, that is CRUD using Hibernate. I will go to the project and I will add the Hibernate library. Then let's look at how to create a CRUD application. And by the way, what is a CRUD application? So the word CRUD, for those who are not familiar, so this one refers to the, any guess? Create. This one refers to read. This one refers to yes. This is update, and the last one refers to the delete operation. The word CRUD refers to that. So create, read, update, delete operations. These are the major four applications that major four type of operation that you are usually performing on the database. So let's try to create a CRUD application, and let's see how we can use the Hibernate to create a CRUD application. I will not go with a complicated example. Let's create a simple student entity, and then let's try to use the CRUD application for saving it onto the database and retrieving it back. So let me go to the Java class, and I'm going to call this as a student, ordinary Java class, and I'm going to call it as a student. Finish it off, and then let's add a few details to the student. So I'm going to say and I'm going to set the getter and setter for this. So let me get the getter and setter for the student. As well as the default, as well as the parameterized constructor. So I'm going to get the default constructor as well as the parameterized constructor. In order to make it as a persistent object, you have to add the annotation at entity, and I'm going to take it from the persistence. So it's the persistent, and then you will have to make one of the field as ID, again from the persistent. So this part you are already familiar. Let's go to the database and let's initialize the database. Start the database server, and then let's create a database. Any name you can give. Once I have the database in place, let me connect to the database, and you notice there are no tables are there. let's add the Hibernate configuration for our application. So I'm going to go and add a Hibernate configuration for my application. Right click, new, under Hibernate you will get Hibernate configuration wizard. Click next, and I'm not going to change the name of it. It's going to ask me for the database, and I'm going to select the database as the CRUD. DB as my database, and there is nothing much that you can do over here. Once that is done, let's map the class to our application. So I'm going to click on add resources, properties, under the so I'm going to add the student. Okay, once the student has been added, let's go to the next one. Let's go to the some configuration properties, and I want to see the SQL statement. So I'm going to say show Hibernate SQL equal to true. Okay. So let's do that thing, and then let's go to the last part, and that's the optional, and not the option, the miscellaneous one, and I'm going to say HVM to DDL is auto. Auto is to say update, so that I can retain it. Click OK. So these are the things that I've done: HPL to DDL, show SQL, and the mapping to the class. So save it. Go to the main. So let's look at the operations. So in order to use the Hibernate, we need a session factory. So let's get the session factory from the Hibernate. Annotation configuration. Dot configure. I'm going to say the name of the dot cfg dot xml. So Hibernate dot cfg dot xml dot build the factory. Once you have the factory with you, you can create a session. Once you have the session, you need to get the transaction. So you can go to the session dot begin transaction. Now when you begin the transaction, you notice that it's actually returning a object of type transaction. You can store this object you can show this transaction in a variable, and you can use this one, or you can use the other one. You can store it like this, either Hibernate or this one, anyone you can use it. Then once you have this object with you, then you can say px dot commit. It's possible. Okay. This is the other way around. You don't have to hunt for the transaction and do it. You can get the transaction object and you can do it. It's not that it is wrong. It is always possible to get the transaction object, but because I'm not, I don't want to confuse you with the previous thing that I've done, I'm going to do this one. This is not a preferred one, because once you get the transaction object, you can just keep the transaction object with you and then do the commit or rollback or anything that you prefer to use it. Now here you are going to do something, and the end you are going to say session dot get transaction and then commit. Instead of that, if you have the transaction object with you, anytime you can say transaction dot commit. It's much easier rather than hunting for the transaction and then trying to close the session. Now let's perform the first operation, and that is the create operation. Now let me create a student object here. Right at the top, let me say student. So you have just created a student, but the Hibernate is not aware of the student. So the first one is you need to store this, create this object in the database. That's the first operation of the struts, of the Hibernate. So let's do that thing. So we are going to go here, and I'm going to say session dot you have saved. When you save the session, actually it returns the serialized object. Okay. There is one more method called as persist. Now the difference between the persist and the save is both of them are going to save the object, no doubt, but the persist will not return anything. The return value for the persist is void. So dot persist will not return anything, whereas when you say dot save, it returns a serializable object back to you. Okay. But both of them will perform the save. So this is if create part of if application. So let me run this application and just verify that. Okay, so I was actually, I have not opened the session, but I was trying to get the session, but it's a wrong thing, and it just stopped. Okay, so what we have done is we have just created a object, and if you go to the table now, and if you look at, if you refresh and if you look at the table, you have a student table, and you have the value stored inside the student table. So it is It's not a new thing. This is the create operation. So you are able to create a record. So let's try to read the record that was being created. So let me go over here and let me remark this statement so that I don't have a student, I'm not recreating the student. Let's go and let's get the student. I'm going to say student yes is equal to session dot, how do I get the student? So the word is very obvious, get and the name of the class. So when you want to retry the value, get and the name of the class, and the name of the class happens to be student dot class and the serial number that you are trying to retry, that is the primary key value that you are trying to retry, and I will have to typecast it so that it becomes usable. So what I have done is I'm trying to read the value which was already stored. So if you look at this session, get returns a object. Okay. There is one more thing called as load. Okay. Both are one and the same actually. One of them will throw a exception. Okay. So if you are using the get, if the get does not find anything, it will return a null object back to you. Whereas the load, when you try to retry something using the load, and if the object is not there, that means that primary key is not there. When I say object is not there, I mean to say that if this number is not there, then you will get a exception saying that that object is not found in the database. We have the remaining part of the program. I have closed the session. After that, I am going to use a so I'm going to say retrieved values are reg number s dot get register number So what you notice that I am trying to retry the value from the database using the get. I try to retry the value 101 from the database. So I get 101 from the database. I have closed the session. That means the entire transaction is over. I am out of the Hibernate now. Once I retry that object from the Hibernate, that object will be available for me for the remaining part of my application. So if I now run this application, you will notice that at the bottom, you will notice that it has retried the value which is there in the database. So just to demonstrate that it is trying to retry the value from the database, I will go to the database and I'm going to manually add one more record into my database, say 505, and say So I will add a separate row called as 505 into my database. So I have added a record, then I'm trying to retrieve this value. I will go to the project here, and I'm going to say I want to retrieve 505, that's this one, from my database. So a new record has been inserted, not using the Hibernate, but physically has been added to the database, and I'm trying to run this application again. So what you notice now is it has retrieved the value even for this. So you will notice that it has retrieved that value. This is the read operation. So you will be able to read a record by specifying the primary key. So if you specify the primary key, it's possible for you to read the records which are there in the database. So let me do the next operation, and that is the update operation. So I am reading the student record here, and I'm going to change the name. So I'm going to say yes dot set name and I'm going to just make an updation, remember, if you try to do a updation to the primary key, that means it's a new record altogether. So the objects are recognized by the primary key. The identity of the object is the primary key. So if you make changes to the primary key, it means a new record altogether. So I'm going to say, I think I gave it C. And let me run this application. I just made a change to the application. Okay. And you notice that I made a change. I never said the yes.save or anything. In this statement, purposely, I have not specified. I read a record, and after that I am making changes to the name. There is no save here. I have not told anything of that type to the Hibernate. So what it has done. Now if you look at the output here, the output no doubt says it is going to be the new name, because it's an object that is getting, so you got the S here, you are changing it here, and naturally when you come to that point, it's the same object that is being changed in the memory. But is it happening in the database? So if you rerun this particular application, you will notice that without the save operation, it has committed that transaction back to it. So you have not asked the Hibernate to exclusively save anything, but when you say commit the session now or commit the transaction now, automatically the values are saved. So what is the meaning of this? When you retrieve the value, say using get or load, you get the object. The object is in the persistent state. What's the meaning of saying object is in the persistent state? The object is in connection with the database. So that connection will be there until you close the session. So once you retrieve the value, so when you say get or load or anything, you are getting it from the transaction manager, or you are getting it from the entity manager. So when you are getting the object, it is in connection with the database. Whatever changes that you make with the object, when it is in connection with the database, will be automatically saved into the database. So let's go one step ahead. I'm going to go here. After closing the session, I'm going to set the name. Okay. So I'm going to set the name after closing the session. You notice that this time the updation is occurring after I have closed the session. Now if I run this application, what will happen? In your output, you will notice here that the name is definitely changed because it's the same object that is being passed out. Let's go to the database over here and let's run this query, and you notice that when you run the query, it has not highlighted that in the database. Why it is not doing that? It's not doing it because this statement is done after you have closed as well as after you have committed the last transaction. After this, when you say session.close, the student object, that's the object yes that you have here, once it reaches out of your transaction, that means to say that your transaction ends here or your session ends here. So from here to here you have the session. Once you are coming out of this session, any changes that you make to the object will be highlighted only in the memory. It will not be persisted back to the database. Now the question is, what if you want to do it again? What if you want to update it after you have closed the session? If you want to save it now, you have to get back the session again, or in other words, you have to go back to the your object. When you come to this point, you usually say your object is detached from the persistent state. So here your object, when you start the session and when you do something at this point, your object is in the persistent state. We say that it is in the persistent state. When you come out of this state, this particular object is now in the detached state. So it is detached out of the persistent. It does not have the connection with the database. If you want to save it now, you have to get back the persistent again and do it. So let's do that part. So how am I going to do it? You will have to get back the session again. How do I get the session back again? So I'm going to say session dot open a new session I'll go and say that I want the name of my factory. I want to know what name I do. Okay. Then I'm going to say session dot update the student So what I'm doing is literally I'm recreating the session again. So I have closed the session and then I'm reopening the session again. This is the new session. The previous session is closed. Here it's a new session, and in that new session I'm just saying that you update the student that has offered, whatever changes to the student that has offered. So I'm going to run this application. Okay. Let's go to the database, and you notice it has updated in the database. So what I have done here, I have closed the session at this point. So this is one session. I'm going to remove all the unwanted spaces here. So this is from here to here. This is one set of session. From here to here, it is the other set. So when your object is in this part, it is in the persistent state. This is also in the persistent state. This is from here to here. This block, when we say this block, it is in the detached. So the object is detached because it doesn't have the persistence. The persistence is closed. So whatever you make changes to the database in the detached state will not be highlighted into the whatever you make changes to the entity in the detached state will not be highlighted in the database. You will have to take it to the persistent state again for doing it. Now the next usual question is, there is one more state here, and this state was the one that is being remarked. What is this state? So here you got an object. That means you are getting the object from the entity manager. It's in the persistent state. You have closed the session here. That means it is in the detached state. What about this state? So there is a separate state here, and you notice that at that state the Hibernate is not aware of the object that is being created. For example, if I create a student with some name here, now this object is not known to the Hibernate. Even though it is known to your application, it is not known to the Hibernate. And this state wherein you have an object but the Hibernate is not aware of it is a transient state. So transient is a place wherein you have an object but the Hibernate is not aware of it. Whereas here you have an object that is obtained from the Hibernate. So we say it's in the persistent state. Whatever you do, Hibernate will take care. Whereas this one is a detached state. Why do you call it as detached state? You got it from the Hibernate. So Hibernate is aware of it, but this object cannot synchronize its value to the database because it doesn't have a connection to the database. So this object is there in the database. Hibernate is aware of this object, but now, as of now, because the connection is closed, this object cannot make an updation directly to the database. So altogether we have three different states in the Hibernate. So that forms the life cycle of the Hibernate. We have an object at the transient state, a state that is created when you start the new instance of the object. So whenever you say new object, a new instance of the object is created in the memory, but the Hibernate is not aware, or your database is not aware of that instance. That is the transient. What is the persistent? Your object is in connection with the database. That means any change you make to the object will be stored into the database. What is detached? Object which was there in the persistent state, because its session got closed, either because of the timeout or because you closed it, it's detached from the database. So it doesn't have the connection with the database. So these are the three states. So if somebody asks you, write the stages of the Hibernate, so you have three different states. As of now, you know that there are three different states. So you start from one point. If you say new, and when I say new, I mean to say this one. If you say new, you are going to, which is the state? Yes, this is the transient state. If you are using new, you are in the transient state. Okay. If you use a method like get, if you use this method get here, so if you use the method get, or there are many others type of it, so if you use a method called as get, then you are in the persistent state. If you close the session, so if you say session dot close, you are in the detached state. So your object is detached. There is one more state, and that is the last part of the CRUD operation, and that is the delete. So what is the meaning of saying delete? You are removing the object out of the memory. Let's even though we are running out of time, I'll just do it. I don't want this object to be here and so on, so I'm going to just remark this. Within this object, I got this object here, and I'm going to say yes, session dot delete the object. So this object is being removed. If you run this application, okay, and if you run this query now, you will notice that that object has been pulled out of the database. So what you have done here is your object is sent for the remover. So once you call this thing, it's in the one more state, that is the remove state. You are telling it to be removed. Now, even though I don't have many lines over here, once you tell the Hibernate that remove the object, it means to tell the it means to say the Hibernate that from here onwards, when the commit occurs, somewhere I have the commit, you are supposed to pull this object out of the database. So the object is not pulled out immediately. When you say commit, it will be committed. Okay. We